we're first.
Are we first?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just take this. You guys can sign them.
Just a bit.
Welcome. Today is March 25th, 2019. We are still waiting for a quorum, but we are going to start today. Members, we have 16 bills on our agenda. We are going to start with Senator Anderson. Senator Anderson, would you please move your bill, Senate File 929, be laid over for possible inclusion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move Senate File 929 to be laid over for possible inclusion.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Do you have any amendments?
I do not for this bill, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
And then please explain your bill to the
You
bill.
bet. Thank you. Madam Chair and members, we've got like 30 minutes, right? Just kidding.
Senator Anderson, that's a different life you're speaking of, not this one.
I'd like to thank
today.
the co-authors of this bill, Senator Pratt, Senator Miller, Senator Benson, Senator Frentz. Member, Senate File 929 addresses the findings and concerns of the April 2017 Office of Legislative Auditor Program Evaluation of the Minnesota High School League. This reform bill was included in last year's omnibus bill and heard in the E12 Policy Committee at the time, but was vetoed by Governor Dayton. In the 2017 report, the OLA found deficiencies in how the league establishes eligibility criteria for students who transfer schools and want to participate in extracurricular athletic programs. The OLA reported that the league's process lacks transparency, sufficient public notice, and external review, and they found deficiencies in how the league makes individual eligibility decisions. The OLA also found that the league's board of directors does not provide sufficient oversight of the administration of student eligibility. The OLA recommended that the legislature require the league to have a more transparent and open process for establishing student eligibility criteria. They also recommended more oversight of individual eligibility decisions by the league's board and an increased role for the Legislative Coordinating Commission and Minnesota Department of Education. Finally, they recommended more openness from the league in its communications with students, their families, and the league's member schools. Madam Chair, I'm happy to walk through the bill, but that's it in a nutshell.
They have this. This is the new process, too.
Yeah, and then in your packets, members, is the transfer eligibility review. So a lot of good work has been done by the board. I do have with me the relatively new, I think it's been about a year, Director Eric Martins from the Minnesota State High School League and Roger Aronson. But I will turn it over to you, Madam Chair, and they are willing to make additional comments or take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Members, I want to make sure you have the bill and that transfer eligibility review form in your packets. I think looking at the time and the agenda that we have, I'm glad you've got great testifiers with you. First, let's open it up and see if any committee members have questions that need to be addressed. I do see that we have a quorum. A quorum is present. I don't see any members' concerns. I have none. Senator Anderson, would you like any closing comments, or would you like to turn it over to your testifiers? We just have a couple moments.
No, Madam Chairs, and they're both fine with just being available here. And again, a lot of good work has been done, and we're ready to just get this passed and have it in the omnibus bill. So I renew my motion to have Senate File 929 be laid over for possible inclusion.
Thank you, Senator Anderson, and really thank you for the long, hard work that brought you to this place today. That's how the best work happens, so thank you so much. All those in favor of Oh, it'll just be laid over. Sorry, no vote there. Senate File 929 is laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Thank you, Senator Anderson. Next on our agenda, we have 121660, which would be Senator Pratt. Senator Pratt, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Sorry for being late. Our last hearing ran a little bit over, so.
It's that time of the year, Senator Pratt. Senator Eichhorn, would you move Senator Pratt's bill laid over for possible inclusion, please? 1260.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll move Senate File 1260.
Thank you. Senator Pratt, to your bill.
Thank you. Madam Chair, districts across Minnesota have followed a model to set up agreements for the provision of technical services involving three-way partnerships between a school district, a business entity, and parents or students. One part of this agreement allows for parents and students to purchase computers and similar devices through the business entity's online store at a price that can be lower than the prevailing market price. But the motivating factor for this bill is to allow school districts, should they decide to, sell computers and similar devices directly to parents and students. In essence, allowing them to dispose of public property directly to those that have been using them. And then to be able to do this at a less than prevailing market price, which is currently not allowed in state statute. Madam Chair, I know this bill was heard last year. I have no testifiers, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Senator Pratt, was this bill included in the omnibus bill last year?
I believe it was, Madam Chair.
I see it was an amendment to the bill, which had been adopted. So this bill was part of the omnibus bill. Members, any questions on Senate File 1260? Senator Pratt?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to thank one of my superintendents, Mike Redmond from Shakopee, for bringing this bill forward. And it's been, he did it in his old district and then just moved to Shakopee and is bringing it there. So thank you very much.
Senator Pratt, just one question.
Yeah.
If this was done in the previous district, why do we need legislation so that it can be done in Shakopee or elsewhere today? Senator Pratt?
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'm not sure I understand the question. Superintendent Redmond was at another district when he came up with the idea. He's just moved to Shakopee and brought this bill to me as his new senator.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. We are glad good ideas follow their instigators. All right, Senate File 1260 will be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Next on our agenda, members, we have Senator Anderson again. Senate File 1297. If you could move your bill, please, Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move Senate File 1297 to be laid over for possible inclusion.
Thank you. Senator Anderson, do you have any amendments today?
I do, Madam Chair. I have the A1 amendment to put the bill in its correct shape. This is language, members, you should have it hopefully in your packet, but this language has been agreed to with all the non-public school stakeholders and Department of Education.
Oh, Senator Anderson, I see.
The A1 amendment.
The A1 has been moved. This is the author's amendment, correct?
That's correct.
All those in favor of the A1 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The A1 is adopted. To your bill, I see it's a delete all amendment. So to your bill as amended, Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate File 1297 is a bill to clarify non-public pupil textbook aid regarding teaching materials, and I'd like to thank Senator Uyghur for being my co-author on this bill. And I wish to thank the various private school organizations who have worked with me on this bill, including the Minnesota Independent School Forum, the Minnesota Association of Independent Schools, the Minnesota Catholic Conference, and the Jewish Community Relations Council. If this bill sounds familiar to you, we did address it last year in the E12 policy committee, I believe, and was included in the omnibus bill last year. But I'd like to turn it over if Karen Balmer from Minnehaha Academy can touch on the bill, that'd be great, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Ms. Ballmer, welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Karen Ballmer. I serve as the lower and middle school principal at Minnehaha Academy. Briefly, I want to share a little bit with you, and it is a pleasure to be here with you today. I thank you for this opportunity to share about an issue that's relatively small and technical in nature, but does have significant impact for our learners. The language we're talking about here today was first enacted by the Minnesota legislature in 1975. So for the last 40 plus years, non-public schools have received support for instructional materials. At Minnehaha Academy, these funds do not cover all of our curriculum and instructional material costs, but they are a significant source of funding for us, which we deeply appreciate. When the authorizing language was enacted in 1975, the world was very different, including the resources available to schools to support their learners in the classrooms. There was no internet, there were no one-to-one devices, no learning management systems, and so on. The statute has been amended from time to time at various points since then to reflect changes in how we deliver education to our students. For example, a provision for CD-ROMs was added in 1996, and electronic books and other materials delivered electronically was added in 2011. So we're at another juncture where the current language just doesn't align with the way that curriculum is being developed and delivered to meet the needs of learners in 2019. As such, we're increasingly unable to access the funds that have been set aside to support our learners simply because the language does not reflect what we know today about the best practice in terms of curriculum development. This change does not stray from the original intent of the law. It's still about supporting students, just allowing us to do so in today's world of educational materials. Members of the committee, I thank you very much for your consideration of this change, and I'm happy to answer questions or provide specific examples if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Ballmer. Members, any questions, comments? Seeing none, final comments, Senator Anderson.
Pretty straightforward. We've moved on from CD-ROMs, Madam Chair. So any update would be great. Appreciate the ability to hear the bill and renew my motion and ask that Senate File 1297 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Senator Eichhorn, Senate File 773.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move Senate File 773 be laid over.
Thank you, Senator Eichhorn. To your bill, looks pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. This was in last year's omnibus bill that was vetoed for other reasons. It appropriates $31,000 in fiscal year 2020 and 2021 for a grant to the Children's Discovery Museum in Grand Rapids. Other similar organizations receive similar grants. $50,000 a year goes to the Minnesota Children's Museum, Rochester, $50,000 to the Duluth Children's Museum, $41,000 for the Minnesota Academy of Science, and $50,000 for the Headwaters Science Museum. And again, this provision was included before. The $31,000 when they testified last year would help them get a lot more kids through the door for free and reduced type admissions and that type of things, and getting more schools in and to help run their general operations. So very important for them. They serve a wide range from its home place in Itasca County all the way to Aiken and Cass and Beltrami and St. Louis. So they serve a wide range, and we'd certainly love to be included in your bill, but that's pretty straightforward, as you said, Madam Chair, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Senator Eichhorn. I do know that we heard this last year. Can you just refresh my memory? How many students, children, come to the Children's Museum each year?
It's in the tens of thousands that come through there every year, again, just because of the regional significance of the facility.
Thank you. And if you have an exact number, you can just email it to me
I
later.
can do that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Eichhorn. Other comments, members? Senator Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Eichhorn, I'm a huge supporter of children's museums and I'm glad you're doing this bill. One question I did have, though, is there's a museum in Bloomington that is often included in these same packages, and I'm wondering if it was considered to be included in this as well.
Senator Eichhorn.
Madam Chair, Senator Kent. So my bill only includes the Children's Museum in Grand Rapids. What I was referencing was other museums that were included in last year's bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Eichhorn. Ms. Hofer, could you explain the base funding for the other museums? That might address Senator Kent's question.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. For fiscal year 2020 and later, funding for museums will be $460,000 per year. Of that amount, $319,000 per year is for the Minnesota Children's Museum, of which $50,000 would go to the Minnesota Children's Museum in Rochester. $50,000 per year is for the Duluth Children's Museum. $41,000 per year is for the Minnesota Academy of Science, and $50,000 per year is for the Headwaters Science Center.
Thank you, Ms. Hofer. Any further comments or questions? Senator Eichhorn renews his motion
Yes, Madam Chair.
that Senate File 773 be laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you, Senator Eichhorn.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is Senator Johnson, Senate File 1341. And I see you have a testifier. Ms. Kreisen, come on up. I move that Senate File 1341 be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Senator Johnson, do you have any amendments today?
Madam Chair, no, I do not.
All right. To your bill, Senator Johnson.
All right. So, Madam Chair and members, thank you so much for the opportunity to come forward today. This is really an honor for me personally. Senate File 1341 is the appropriation for the Minnesota Children's Museum, which for me personally and for my family has been a big asset. And I know it is a big asset for the state of Minnesota. We were just there doing a little bit of research for this bill on Friday. I spent about 3 hours over there with the kids. And it's amazing to look around and see the different, there'll be a Roseau Ram hat or an outfit from, Duluth. And that place is being used by people from all over the state, not just St. Paul and Minneapolis and the surrounding suburbs, but a lot of folks coming there to just experience hands-on learning that they maybe can't do in their own communities. Really a good time for parents to let loose their kids and explore the world a little bit within some safe confines. So I'm really honored to bring this forward, and I'd just like to thank Senators Kent, Dames, Pappas, and Uyghur for being co-authors on this bill with me. With that, Madam Chair, I'd like my testifier to speak a little bit to the bill and what that funding is used for.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Ms. Kreisen, welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Diane Kreisen, President of Minnesota Children's Museum. So I just want to touch on what Senator Johnson referred to. So the experiences at Minnesota Children's Museum are all designed around the research of how kids learn through hands-on exploration, which frankly is play. And so I just want to briefly quote from an American Academy of Pediatrics paper that was just put out in the last few months that states, "The importance of playful learning for children cannot be overemphasized, and that play is fundamentally important for learning 21st century skills such as problem solving, collaboration, and creativity, which require executive functioning skills that are critical for adult success. And lastly, in the presence of childhood adversity, play becomes even more important." So there are 3 components to the bill that I'll just briefly describe. The first component is an appropriation to Minnesota Children's Museum that supports an access program so that families, regardless of income, can have access to the museum. This funding started from the state in 1997 and has been essentially flat over those 20-plus years, not inflation adjusted, just flat. And at the same time, the need in the community and the scope and scale of that access program has grown tremendously. There are 3 components to that program. One is a sliding fee for school groups based on free and reduced lunch population. A second piece is for community-based organizations that serve underserved resourced families, that it provides dedicated time for their families to experience the museum, often not knowing the context of what the museum is in the first place and how they might engage with the learning experiences there. And then thirdly, through those two avenues, also then promoting the opportunity for families at 130% of the poverty level and below to be able to have a scholarship membership. Particularly with those scholarship memberships, that has grown by 1,300% since the appropriation started. That access program is unfunded by nearly $600,000, and this request does ask for an increase of $181,000 to that original appropriation. So unfunded by 600 based on that growth, and we're asking for 181 in that piece. That's part number one. Part number two is $50,000 for the Minnesota Children's Museum of Rochester. That is a request for flat funding on that. And that funding supports two things in our Rochester, Minnesota location. First of all, that families have access to early childhood learning experiences in southeastern Minnesota. Last year, that museum served more than 34,000 visitors, including nearly 5,000 that came through their Play for All access program. In addition, in order to further the reach and impact of what we call the powers of play, we want parents and educators to understand how important play is. And so that funding has also helped us to do a set of communication strategies so that knowing that play is declining in childhood, so that the importance of play can be promoted and that play can happen beyond a visit to the Children's Museum. And then the third part of the request is a one-time appropriation for developing a program called Executive Function, which I just want to touch on briefly and quote from Harvard University's Center on the Developing Child that describes executive function as the air traffic controller of the brain, right? It's a set of skills that relies on 3 brain functions: working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control. And executive function is a strong predictor of readiness to learn in the K through 12 education system. Yet children aren't born with these skills. They are born with the potential to develop them. And play is one of those primary ways children develop these skills in early childhood learning. So as a children's museum, I just want to tell briefly how we got to this point of asking for this one-time request. When we designed the new Children's Museum that reopened a year and a half ago, we partnered with the University of Minnesota and grounded ourselves in the latest research there. Dr. Megan Gunner, who chairs the Institute of Child Development there, led a group, and a graduate student compiled the research on play. The research on executive function and that early brain development of the prefrontal lobe of our brain was the latest thing that we didn't know about, we didn't understand, and we learned a lot about it. We designed the experiences in our museum grounded around that latest research on brain development that didn't exist. Next, what we did over this past year is we've been leading an early childhood learning collaborative to take this information on executive function, as well as our researchers at our Institute of Child Development created the Minnesota Executive Function Scale, which can actually measure where a child is at. And we've been leading a group of 10 agencies in order to share this knowledge about and get certified on this Minnesota Executive Function Scale, and then learn play-based strategies in how to develop these skills in kids. Growing from that, we are actually pursuing a federal grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to create a national traveling exhibit that has interactives around how to children, interactives that develop this executive functioning skills, and then messaging for parents and other adults that come through that to understand how important executive function is and what they can do, just simple ways they can do to support that learning, really concrete steps. So as we thought about what more can we do, though that's a federal thing that would tour all across the United States, what more could we be doing for children here? We would host that exhibit in this space, but that would only be a 3.5-month exposure, maybe every 4 or 5 years. And so in conversations with some of our partners and friends, such as through early childhood family education, we came with this idea about how could we build this capacity and create this capacity for us here in Minnesota. And so what we present to you in this one-time grant is this opportunity to create a curriculum, interactives for children, and content for how to talk to parents and providers about what executive function is and how to support it. With this grant, we would partner with those agencies to find out what's the best way to create a sustainable program, but in our preliminary conversations, there's a lot of excitement around the idea of creating mobile interactives by different regions of the state that would tour in different regions of the state to have that asset exist, along with online training materials, and then engagement at the parent education and provider education conferences. So I will wrap up with that, given your time.
Thank you, Ms. Kreisen. Learning through play is so powerful, and I appreciate the museum's work in that area, and particularly your focus looking in light of recent early brain development, new brain science. So thank you for that. Senator Johnson, any further comments?
Madam Chair, no, I just thank you very much for your time today and really encourage a thoughtful debate when putting together your bill on this. It's something that's very important to the state of Minnesota, and I think the research done at the Children's Museum is second to none. So really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Any comments, members? Senate File 1341 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Next, we have Senate File 1918. Oh, excuse me, 918.
Just to be laid over. Senator Nelson, you have Senate File 918. Would you like to move Senate File 918?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move Senate File 918 be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Members, this is a very short bill. It allows schools to start before Labor Day if they so choose. If there ever has been a year where we might see why that's important, it would be this year, where we've had such extreme snow closures. This bill simply deletes the requirement, this is the requirement, it deletes the requirement that districts not commence school year before Labor Day, except as provided under paragraph B. This will allow districts to begin the school year when they see fit. Many of us are strong proponents of local control. We believe that's very important. Each school district is incredibly different. The exception that exists under current law in B are such. One, to accommodate a construction or remodeling project of $400,000 or more affecting a school district's facility, and if the district has an agreement under particular statutes with the district that qualifies under Clause 1, and if the district agrees to the same schedule with the school district in an adjoining state. So we think every school district should have this availability. Mr. Chair, I believe, are there two folks who wish to testify here?
Thank you, Senator Nelson. If we could have the two folks, if you'd like to testify, keep it around 2 minutes apiece, we certainly would appreciate it. So whichever one would like to go first, feel free to do so. State your name and proceed with your testimony.
All right. Yes, I'm Michelle Whitty, and I'm a member of the local school board of District 833, South
And
Washington
welcome
County
to the
Schools.
Senate
Thank
Education
you.
Committee.
Thank you so much, and Senator Nelson for this bill and other senators today. I'm very happy to be here mostly for the 18,000 students in our school district that represent almost 900,000 public school students, who I say are our most important industry. I really understand how the decision around our school calendar often is based around some of the challenges that people might feel within our wonderful summer industry. And I get that. I have my Sawbill reservations already made for Labor Day weekend, and I'm looking forward to my Pronto Pup. But I also know that all of our students need to have that choice. Another hat I wear is that I'm a parent volunteer, and I've helped lead 4 of our last 5 levy and bond referendums. And I know what local control is. We, as a school district, do not get to levy taxes, right? Like cities and states and counties do. So I get local control, and we're really just asking for that same exact opportunity. The opportunity to do what's best for kids. That's what we all know we need to do in serving what is my favorite industry, which is public school students. And in doing so, to remember that that means that if northern Minnesota, for example, wants to continue to have school after Labor Day so their families can work in their businesses, or rural communities want to have their kids at the 4-H building, that's awesome. That's great. We support that. What we support is local school district choice to pick the calendar that's best for their communities and best for what we know our kids and families need to be successful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Lilberg?
Yes. Thank you very much, committee, for your time today. My name is Gina Lilleberg, and I serve as a school board member at Atwater Cosmos Grove City School District in West Central Minnesota. I also represent Director District 3 for the Minnesota School Board Association, meaning basically anything from Atwater to the South Dakota border and from Atwater to the Iowa border is covered in my Director District. What we are asking is that we be allowed to exercise that local control and dictate that calendar. We currently, before we bring our school calendar before the board for approval, it is run by not only our employee unions, but we also have district advisory committees that review that. And those are made up of local business owners, parents, and other entities within our local community. So we've had a number of different eyes that have taken a look at that before the board even sees the calendar for approval. This is not a calendar that we do in isolation. And we also have systems in place where if we have students that are in attendance at the state fair or working within our resort system in our communities, that they have that ability to continue doing that. I myself am a 4-H leader, and my kids spend the first few days at the state fair showing livestock. And so it is something that impacts us directly. And we do, in this instance, our school district will be starting prior to Labor Day this year because of a building project. But we have already put things in place where those students will not be penalized in any way, shape, or form for their participation at the state fair. We actually encourage it. So thank you for hearing us.
And I understand there's 3 other testifiers, Mr. Carlson, Bagnoli, and Quillis. If you would please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to start real quick because, as you know, it's committee deadline week, and a couple of us have to be in a couple different places at the same time. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tony Quillis, and I am representing Hospitality Minnesota, and part of the 3 Musketeers you'll hear from today, myself, Mr. Carlson, and Mr. Bagnoli. And just want to let you know, Mr. Chairman, that obviously we are opposed to getting rid of Labor Day school start, and you can imagine why. But, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that, let you know that Hospitality Minnesota are strong supporters of a quality education system in Minnesota. And we believe we can have a post-Labor Day school start and still have a positive educational outcomes that are fully compatible. And I don't want to take away from any of Mr. Carlson's testimony, because I think he's going to touch on how important tourism is to the state of Minnesota. But I think you've all heard, as we've gone out, one of the things that's facing us as an industry and also throughout the state of Minnesota is a workforce shortage. And when you start Labor Day, when school starts before Labor Day, that really exemplifies and magnifies our workforce shortage, because we utilize a lot of high school and college age kids Mr. Chairman. And so one other thing I just want to pass along before I turn it over to my two colleagues are the University of Minnesota, Minnesota Center for Tourism did a survey a couple of years ago, and keep this in mind, asking should schools start before Labor Day? And 75.6 folks that responded to that survey said no. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And turn it over to Mr. Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Quillis. Mr. Carlson, 2 minutes.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm Joel Carlson. I own a government affairs business here in St. Paul, and I'm here on behalf of the community of Minnesota Resorts. I've represented the small family resorting business in the legislature here since 1996, and this is a critical issue for us. And as Mr. Quillis said, we support quality education in Minnesota. It's the pathway to success. That's not our issue at all. But as you discuss the school calendar, what we ask you to do is consider all of the competing interests of the state. And one of those interests is the rural economy in Minnesota, which is many times fueled by tourism. And the linchpin of tourism in Minnesota is lodging. And that's what resorts provide. Tourism in Minnesota, the second largest industry, has over 270,000 employees. 270,000, we generate over 18% of all sales tax that's paid in Minnesota. And resorts, as a critical component of that, are in decline. We used to have over 3,600 resorts in Minnesota. We're now down to about 800. And when a resort is sold for private development, it never comes back. And that is that lodging from resorts that drives the grocery store and the restaurant and the fishing guide. And we don't ask you to do things that are out of the, that you just don't have control over, like allowing Senator Anderson to catch a record walleye. We ask you to focus on things that really matter to us, that matter to all parts of the state. And Mr. Quillis mentioned the University of Minnesota study, but here's a couple things that, in addition to parents wanting school to start after Labor Day, here's a couple things he didn't mention. Parents are more likely to book a vacation in August and September by over 50% when school starts after Labor Day. Resorters report that 40% of their bookings are lost in August, late August, when school starts after Labor Day. These are the stark economic realities that you're talking about for the people I represent. And as I said many times, that end of the season is what is make or break whether or not you can stay in business. This is a critical issue. Every year we come back to this issue at the Capitol because it is so important to us. And particularly when you look at the weather patterns that we have, I encourage you to jump in the lake in Minnesota in June. It's not very nice. We need to have August. And this year, when September, I know when you passed this bill, you knew there were 7 days in a week. And you knew that Labor Day was going to roll around a little bit later. And that's why this is so important to us. This year, it actually falls on our side. We get a little extra time. That's great. Most years, it doesn't. So we really urge you to balance all of the interests of the state, Mr. Chairman and members, as you consider this. This is a critical issue for us, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Bagnoli?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Joe Bagnoli with the law firm of McGranche Carnival. I'm here representing the Minnesota State Agricultural Society, the organization that puts on the Minnesota State Fair. The Minnesota State Fair, as you probably all know, is in the metro area. However, the Minnesota State Fair is run by almost all entirely rural members. They are made up of, composed of people that are very active in their local county fairs. The rural economy and the rural lifestyle is unbelievably important to them and to the State Agricultural Society, and they would suggest a couple of things. One, that there is all forms of education that can be done. And the education that is done by being a 4-H'er at the state fair, I heard the previous testifier talk about her experience. Unfortunately, I've had people that were teachers and had their teachers, and it was in Lacroix County, a teacher when Labor Day used to start 17 years ago, no earlier than September 1st. He said, I was a teacher and my son won the lamb, or I'm obviously from the metro area, won a sheep competition. They had to choose. Education obviously is very important to them. They had to choose, being an educator, about whether their son could go to the state fair, which is like the Super Bowl for 4-H'ers when you get to that point. Whether their son had to stay in school or go to the educational experience of being at the state fair and showing their animal. That is a horrible decision. Fortunately, there were some good folks where the woman who previously testified, but that's not uniform. I would suggest, as Representative Carlson, Mr. Carlson, excuse me, once representative a number of years ago mentioned, that there are a variety of factors in that. If this was, and this is something we always said, if this was the only impediment to improving education in Minnesota, we would be here saying we are for it. This bill adds no days of education to the system. It provides a little bit of flexibility for the administrators. Flexibility is important. We would just ask you to consider there are other considerations at play as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bagnoli. Members, any questions? Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm probably in the unique position of having two constituents here today testifying on opposite sides of the same bill, so that's always a fun place to be. But my esteemed school board members, Michelle Witte, I think articulates a lot of this well, and I do support this bill. And I'm not without sympathy on the tourism side of it, because that has been most of my private sector career. So I definitely appreciate the challenges in that that have been outlined today. But I also think that there are ways to work this out. You know, I believe that Minnesotans can adapt and can change how they vacation sometimes. I don't think this is going to be the end of people traveling to those parts of the state at that time of year. I imagine, as I'm looking at an empty nest, that there will be times where I'm like really excited to go on a vacation where there might not be a lot of small children around. But anyway, I just think that this is a case where because of the differences of our communities around the state, that giving that local flexibility is really important. I would also just offer, I have a bill, Senate File 412, that might be an interesting compromise if we get to this point, which purely addresses these next 2 years where it is such a late start. So if we can't make this happen, I hope we can consider at least offsetting that schedule, which I know is not necessarily a popular opinion at this table either, but thank you.
And members, other questions? And seeing none, Senator, was there a question over here? No. Seeing none, Senator Nelson moves that
Mr. Chair, I do want to make a couple comments.
Go ahead.
Very important. I do want to make sure that members have this in their packet, Minnesota Business Partnership, their strong support for this bill. And I just want to add that I'm a little embarrassed that I'm back here with this bill again. This was my maiden bill 16 years ago. And I'm surprised that we still haven't quite moved beyond that. But you do know, members, that in 2015, we did pass session law that allowed the beginning of a school year on September 1 because Labor Day came so late in that calendar year. And if you look ahead, members, we are to that point now, again, where we're going to have these very late start dates. And I'm a big fan of tourism. It's important to our state, all across the state. And just as a reminder, this doesn't change the number of days that students need to be in school. And I would not expect for one moment that Minneapolis-St. Paul would change their start date with the fair, with the state fair right in their background. And I also believe that the resorts would also be seeing tourism just as well, even if there's a late start date. And my last comment is that parents do this already, members. Parents take their children on vacations at all different times. And so I believe if we are in local control, I think every school district is going to best determine when is the best time for those students to start. So those are my final comments, Mr. Chair, and I move that Senate File 918 be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill.
Senate File 918, moved by Senator Nelson, will be laid over for possible inclusion into the Senate E12 omnibus bill. Senator Nelson, next you have Senate File 2212.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, there are many different ways to arrive at the same goal. And this is a bill, Senate File 2212, which is called the Flexible Learning Year. And this bill simply allows schools to operate under the Flexible Learning Year program if permission is granted by the Commissioner of Education. Now, such alternatives could include year-round schooling, like 4515 has been shown to be highly effective, specifically in communities or schools where students are learning a new language. It also would allow things like 4-day school weeks or early school starts, and schools choose to do this for a number of reasons: fiscal reasons, academic reasons, and the legislation before you proposes to eliminate the requirement simply of the commissioner's approval. Again, we are simply looking to the locally elected school board that after negotiations with affected employees and consultations with the public, those people who elect or re-elect them or unelect them, that those local school boards would be entirely responsible for deciding whether or not to have a flexible learning year. That's the bill in a nutshell, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson, and you have, I think it's 6 testifiers, so Senator Nelson, do you have an amendment?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, before I do that, I forgot to move the A2 amendment, which is just a repealer that would allow the flexible learning year to go forward.
And this is your first stop, so that would be an author's amendment?
Yes, it is. And if we need comment on that, I'll turn it over to our council.
A2.
A2.
So the A2 members in your packets, it's an author's amendment. Members, all those in favor of the A2 amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The A2 amendment is carries. If the testifiers would come forward, if we could get 3 people up here at a time. And testifiers, I'm going to ask that you limit your remarks to no more than 2 minutes. So, ma'am, if you would like to go first, welcome to the Senate, and please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Melissa Saucer. I serve on the Farmington Area Public School Board as well as the Minnesota School Boards Association Board of Directors. On the executive committee, I represent the school board members in Dakota County as well as the state. And I serve on the Intermediate 917 board, so I keep pretty busy keeping watch over our kids. But I'm here today to help Senator Nelson here about her bill. I want to share with you, as a school board, we have a delegate assembly where we get together as a caucus of elected school board officials and choose the policies that we'd like to see enacted. This fits into one of the policy positions that we have, which is policy 4.217, which urges the legislator to amend Minnesota State statute and rule to allow locally elected school boards to establish and operate a flexible learning year program without the approval of the Commissioner of Education. To share a little bit about my story, in Farmington, we're part of the Innovation Zone. We've done a lot of things within our school to alter our school day to programs. We have hybrid classes, we have self-paced classes, we have students that choose what classes work best for them, and then they get their work done and they do something else on off time. Looking at this would be just another step to complement how we look at the school day. How we look at the school year would allow us more flexibility to choose what would be best for those students. Some students take longer, some students learn quicker. This gives us the flexibility to decide what would work best. And also considering the legislation that Senator Nelson and a few other members have put forward with the competency-based education bill, this would complement that as well, because for these programs to succeed, we would need to have flexibility with the school calendar for those students to be able to thrive within the creativity those programs provide. So I want to thank you for your time today and realize that the local school boards really want to do what's best for their kids. They know the community, and if we were to look at a flexible school year calendar within our district, it could be look at a variety of different ways. Our school elementary students could have a different schedule than our high school students, and vice versa, picking what is best, the needs for the students in our schools based on what we feel will serve them best. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Saucer. Ms. Lilberg?
Yes. Thank you for your time again, members of the committee. I come to you today with a unique story. ACGC operates on a 4-day school week, and we have since the 2010-2011 school year. This is something that was originally enacted to save our district money on transportation costs. We were facing statutory operating debt and devastating budget cuts. This was something that has paid dividends for us well in excess of what we anticipated. We have seen our test scores increase and satisfaction not only from our students and staff, but from our parents skyrocket. Our school day, when we switched from 5 days a week to 4, only had to get 20 minutes longer every day in order to have the same contact minutes as we did on a 5-day school week. Our students report satisfaction in the 90 percentile. Our staff, the upper 90 percentile. We just recently surveyed our parents again, which we do about every 3 years to ensure that we're still meeting the needs of the district. This is something that has overwhelmingly had their support from the beginning and continues to have their support. I ask that you would allow us to continue that local control without seeking the approval of the Commissioner of Education.
Thank you, Ms. Littleberg. Next, we'll have Mr. Carlson, Mr. Bagnoli, and Mr. Quillis. If you three folks would come forward. Mr. Carlson, please state your name, proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joel Carlson for the Community of Minnesota Resorts will be brief. And our comments sort of follow along the line of the problem that we have with the first bill repealing the school Labor Day start time. But these flexible learning years go on right now with the post-Labor Day school requirement. They're not incompatible. Black Duck has had a 4-day week for over 10 years now. And one of my resort presidents is the chair of that school board. So we've watched that. But I felt hoodwinked a little bit when they first passed this statute. Because I asked the proponents, now, is this a way to get around the school start time? And they said, oh, no, this just gives us flexibility. And I said, okay. Shortly after that, 28 school districts made a petition to the Department of Education to start before Labor Day as part of a flexible learning year. And the sole purpose of it was to get around the Labor Day school start. The Department of Education granted that experiment for those 28 districts. I think all of them have dropped out of it right now. And they did it to improve learning outcomes. We didn't get to this during our last presentation. But learning outcomes in those 28 districts did not improve. In fact, they were flat or went down. And when districts are now setting their calendars, like Minneapolis, which has already set their calendars for 2020 and 2021, they're starting after Labor Day. And when they surveyed parents in their district, 85% of the parents in that district wanted school to start after Labor Day. And Senator Kent, the problem that we have is that 80% of our guests come from Minnesota. And our guests at the resort in Pelican Rapids don't come from Pelican Rapids. That is the access for your constituents. And when you can't make it, when your business goes under because you just don't have enough revenue to make it, that access to our great natural resources that your constituents enjoy is gone. And so I don't mind the flexible learning year so long as it remains compatible with the post-Labor Day school requirement, if there's a way to improve learning outcomes. We don't think they're inconsistent, but as a backdoor way to get around, as we have seen this be used, a backdoor way to get around the post-Labor Day requirement, then we have problems. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Bagnoli?
Mr. Chair, Joe Bagnoli, Grand Shake Carnival. I do not have anything more to add. Mr. Carlson did a terrific job.
Thank you. Is Mr. Quillis here?
Mr. Quillis is not. He had to, Mr. Chair, he had to go to the next
Thank you.
He's down the road, but he did want me to point out, Mr. Chair, that there's a letter in your packet from the Grocers Association in opposition to both of these bills.
Okay. Members, there is a letter in your packet from the Grocers Association, so if you please take a look at that. Ms. Schneider, if you would please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Nelson.
Just a brief comment before Ms. Schneider. I do not believe that flexible learning year was a backdoor way around Labor Day start or not. There's a lot of good reasons that schools should have local control, and we'll talk about that later.
Ms. Schneider.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Caitlin Snyder with the Minnesota Department of Education. Historically, the Department of Education has supported school districts taking advantage of the flexible learning year provisions that are currently set in statute. And as Chair Nelson said, our school board members are the closest local elected officials in education, and we certainly value their opinion and their choices on how to set the best calendar for their school districts. But we think that the current statute has a number of checks and balances to balance the local decisions and responsibilities between the department and the school board. So if members look at the language that's stricken starting on 2.10 to 212, this says that future approvals for the 4-day school week are contingent upon the results of the World's Best Workforce Plan for the 4-day school week approved school districts. So a plan is approved by the department, and then the districts are responsible for meeting academic achievement goals that are set in their World's Best Workforce Plan. So this is one of the feedback loops that gives both the local district authority but the department authority in making sure that you're hitting your goals. Language on 2.30, this says if the commissioner disapproves the application for the establishment of a flexible learning year program, then we have to provide detailed reasons for the disapproval. So again, providing checks and balances between the local school district and the department. And then finally, if you look on page 3, so on 3.5, so in the bill, the department would still be responsible for making sure that districts are cooperating with and providing supervision of flexible learning year programs, but without the approval process that's currently set in statute. So we would be losing an important part of the feedback process for local school districts and the department in making sure that they're hitting their locally set goals. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Schneider. Members, any questions for Senator Nelson? Senator Swedzinski.
Ms. Snyder, has the commissioner ever denied an application?
Ms. Snyder.
Mr. Chair and Senator Swedzinski, I do not believe that this commissioner has denied an application.
She's not been here.
Good answer. Very good. And maybe this is to the districts that have had
Follow up, Mr. Senator Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Are we assuming that this just adds 2 hours to the school day if it goes to 4 hours? Is that a safe guess? That we would add, to go from a 5-day week to a 4-day week, we just add 2 hours?
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Swedzinski, I'm glad you asked that question because this legislation doesn't change the hourly requirement that our schools have at all. Neither does it change the requirement regarding standards. So it doesn't change any requirements upon our school. And actually, this particular piece of the flexible learning year legislation just removes the requirement that the department must authorize it. In other words, a locally elected school board can determine whether or not it is in the best interest of its constituents, its children, its schools to adopt a particular flexible learning year. So this just removes the requirement that the department be part of that discussion.
Members, other questions? Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a question for Ms. Snyder. Must school districts still report to the commissioner that they've changed their school year hours or days? Is there still a reporting piece to it?
Ms. Snyder?
Mr. Chair and Senator Clausen, there would still have to be reporting to the department, both for calculation of instructional hours and their calendar, and also to meet the enforcement criteria that's still maintained in Section 5.
Members, other questions? Seeing none, Senator Nelson, we got a couple minutes. Do you want to wrap it up?
Yep, just a couple questions. Very good discussion. I greatly appreciate that. And note that, again, this is a locally determined need about what's the best calendar to for each individual district to educate its students. And there have been denials. There have been denials, maybe just not with our newest commissioner. But again, I believe that this is important. I think we need to give our schools that local control and flexibility to determine how, when, and best. So I just close with that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson moves that Senate File 2212 be laid over for possible inclusion in the E12 omnibus bill. Senator Nelson. Next, we have Senate File 1957.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate File 1957 has to do with school safety grants. We've talked about school safety a number of times. We had some legislation, millions of dollars last year that was vetoed. The threat has not gone away, members. Senate File 1957 appropriates $100 million in fiscal year 2020. This is one-time spending from the general fund to the Commissioner of Education for school safety facility grants. This would allow our schools to get their schools to that baseline security that is necessary. You might recall that last year there was a compromise position after the governor vetoed our school safety bill of $25 million in the bonding bill. That was gone rather quickly. The need is still there. It's our job to make sure that our schools have the resources to make sure that their facilities are safe. We live in a new era. Many of the buildings and campuses that our children attend were not designed for the type of school safety that is needed today. So very simple. With that, I'll turn it over to my testifiers.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. And Mr. Harvey, welcome to the Senate Education Committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Bill Harvey. I am the school board treasurer for Anoka Hennepin Public Schools and happy to be here. First of all, I wanted to thank Senator Nelson for her work on this, and there is a great need. And so I'm testifying to the fact that last year, Anoka Hennepin benefited from the bill that was in place. Of the 44 schools in our district, we had 8 schools that were awarded grants to the tune of $490,123, and we're appreciative of that. But we also had 36 schools in our district that were not funded to the tune of $896,757,000. So that speaks briefly to the need that's out there, and we're not unique. Anoka Hennepin may be unique in the fact that we're the largest school district in the state of Minnesota, and we educate approximately 5% of the K-12 population, but our needs are very similar to every other school district, whether they're rural or metro. And so we want to say thank you. We're very appreciative. But I also wanted to add a few comments kind of in question and answer format to give the committee here a little more information on what it means in our case and what we've dealt with. So for instance, the inequity of one building receiving funds while another did not impacts the district. Our grant requests were written in the areas of highest need, and so we're very grateful for the awards we received. We focused on enhanced communication upgrades and upgrades to our infrastructure so that the buildings that were awarded will receive the first new two-way radios that we're greatly needing. And then it says, where did the schools that received the grants fall in line of priorities? Since 2012, Anoka Hennepin has worked on perimeter security upgrades, and we've invested millions in capital projects to enhance our school security district-wide. Our greatest need at this time is updated communication and improving our digital security cameras. And so these grants were assigned to a part of a larger infrastructure program so we could fall within the parameters of the grants. Did not getting some of the grants cause some vulnerability or liability? Great questions. We have the same needs at all of our schools, so whatever isn't addressed with grant awards is a concern. And to the extent possible, we will augment those awards with capital money and other funding sources, but there are definitely not enough resources to do this in a timely manner. Does building safety come into play with the parents in the district? Absolutely. The fundamental concern for all of our parents is that we first protect their children. And then last comment here is, have you had to change plans or make different decisions based on only one school getting the grant? We've had to slow our implementation of our security cameras based on the award amounts. So once again, we're grateful for getting the money. We support Senator Nelson's work on this, although as I read the bill itself, when I get to line 1.14 on down, it says, awarded on a first-come, first-served basis, except that the commissioner must give priority to districts that were not awarded a grant under the laws in 2018. So I guess we go to the back of the line now unless there's an amendment to this. But once again, there's a great need out there, and so wanted to thank Senator Nelson for
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Dr. Jenkins, welcome, and please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Carlton Jenkins, Superintendent of Robbinsdale Area Schools. And I would like to start off by thanking, first of all, the committee for hearing this. Thanks to Senator Nelson for championing this for us. Last year, she mentioned in her opening remarks there was $25 million out there for competitive grants, and I just have to give you, in terms of as a school superintendent across the country, we're living in different times now, and when we think about children who are in schools in our communities, they're experiencing schools differently than we have experienced schools. I can't recall a school shooting during my time while I was in K through 12. So today, there are aftermaths that we have to think about. And that's why this money and the increase in the monies that's out there, we have to think about all of it, the trauma that's going on right now, the mental health piece of it, the whole psychological effect impacts the academic achievement of schools, and the safety part really becomes number one. And we have to think about safety because we all know from a neurological standpoint, our students and our staff and our parents, you just can't rest if you know that our schools can be compromised at any time. And this is not just about shootings. This is schools being compromised, someone walking in through the doors, and you're not having any visual of the individuals in your parking lots, and students, staff, parents could get attacked in any kind of ways. We're having to think a whole lot differently today than what we used to think in our schools. As the Senator mentioned, Senator Nelson mentioned, today's schools are not adequate for what our issues are, and if they were built some years ago. And so we needed the dollars that we did receive. In our district, we are one of the recipients. We received $182,000, and we're very appreciative of that because no amount is too small, but we do know that a lot more is needed. We had applied for nearly $5 million, and we had one school to receive it, and so there were 17 facilities who did not receive it. And we had to answer those questions in terms of, if it's good enough to increase the safety in one school, then what about the other schools? And so our highest needed schools did not receive anything. In fact, the one middle school that did receive it, they were number 16 on our list of 18 schools. So I ask you to really think about that and think about what do we need to do collaboratively to make sure that we're ensuring the safety of all of our students and all of our staff and our parents when they enter into our facilities. In our school, we've done a lot to try to upgrade in terms of our security, upgrading in terms of some of our equipment, but it hasn't kept pace. And so I'm asking that you really support this particular effort by Senator Nelson, because we really do need it. The line item that my colleague also brought out about the districts that received a grant, they go to the back of the line, and I just suggest or would like to make a request that you consider making it a friendly amendment, and those who are interested in however we get them first come, first serve, we would greatly appreciate that. And right now, as it stands, when I'm having conversations with the students, I was in a building the other day, and the power went out. And for a moment, you should have seen the students. They were really in that mode, like, oh my, what's going on? And then the power came back on, and we went back to normal. But there's nothing normal about being in schools today when you think about safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Members, any questions for Senator Nelson or the testifiers? Seeing none, Senator Nelson, would you like to move Senate File 1957 be laid over for possible inclusion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. And let me just say, we have to realize the times that we live in. And these times demand that we have this baseline security, It's one time. We would expect our new schools to be built to today's safety standards, but this is something that we need one time to get our schools up to that baseline security. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move Senate File 1957 be laid over for possible inclusion.
Senator Nelson has moved Senate File 1957 be laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you, Senator Nelson, and thank you to the testifiers. Senator Nelson, I think we'll have you stay right at the table as the next two are not here. So if you would like to do Senate File 735.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
What was that? Senator Nelson, if you would like to move Senate File 735.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move Senate File 735, codifying the teacher code of ethics, be laid over for possible inclusion. Members, this may look familiar to you. This was in 2018. This was in our conference committee report, and it received bipartisan support. Again, this year, the House Omnibus Policy Bill also, House File 1711, does place the Code of Ethics in statute. And that's what I'm proposing to do here, that we put our Teacher Code of Ethics in statute. It's a common sense proposal that parents and taxpayers require. And the part that you might note in there is that our teachers provide professional education services in a non-discriminatory manner, including not discriminating on the basis of political, ideological, or religious beliefs. This is in our Teacher Code of Ethics. We're just putting it into statute. The bill also provides that PELSB must develop a process for a school district to receive a written complaint about a teacher under the Code of Ethics and forward that complaint to PELSB. And then school board must inform parents and guardians in the school district of their ability to submit a complaint to the school board. So it's a good government bill, transparency, and that's it. Senate File 735.
Thank you, Senator Nelson, and I see you have no testifiers. Are there any testifiers in the audience that would like to testify? Seeing none, members, are there any questions by the members to Senator Nelson? Seeing none, Senator Nelson.
I'd like to renew my motion that Senate File 735 be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill.
Senator Nelson has moved that Senate File 735 be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Rosen, if you would please come forward. Senate File 629. Senator Rosen, welcome to the Senate E12 Committee.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members. Senate File 629 is a bill that allows students to possess and apply sunscreen products during the school day and at school events. It also allows the school district to adopt a policy in accordance with the legislation. It clarifies that the school personnel are not required to provide or apply sunscreen. Currently, a doctor's note is required for possession of sunscreen, which are regulated as over-the-counter drugs under the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, because it makes a claim, it's a drug claim that it helps prevent sunburn and decreases the risk of skin cancer and early skin aging caused by the sun, falling under the medication ban, therefore requiring students to have a note or prescription from a doctor in order to apply the sunscreen. Minnesota has the highest rates of melanoma in the Midwest, along with Utah, Delaware, Vermont, and Idaho, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So there are 9 other states that are considering this legislation, and if this passed, they will be joining 18 other states. And with me, Madam Chair, I have Dr. Kristen Hook, who is with the Minnesota Dermatological Society.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Kristen Hook.
Dr. Hook, welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself for the tape, please.
Thank you. I'm a practicing pediatric dermatologist in the Twin Cities. I'm also Associate Professor of Dermatology and Pediatrics at the University of Minnesota and current president of the Minnesota Dermatological Society. I'm here to testify on behalf of Senate File 629 to remove barriers to proper sun protection in the schools. This is a common sense bill and places no additional burden on schools or cost to the state. As Senator Rosen said, 18 states have passed similar legislation, and an additional 9 have current pending legislation. Sunscreen is still regulated as an over-the-counter drug under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and can require a physician's note to apply in school. This rule is variably enforced, but as a physician, I write many scripts and letters to allow students to apply sunscreen during the school day and even to apply sun protective hats at recess. This adds to the burden of documentation that we already carry as physicians, as well as for schools and parents. Sunscreens are safe. They are not medicinal products. We know that the early and regular use of sunscreen can prevent sunburn, skin cancer, and in particular melanoma. And as Senator Rosen mentioned, Minnesota does have one of the highest rates of melanoma in the Midwest. Kids spend so much of their childhood and hours in the sun at school, and they need to be protected there as well. We ask for your support of this bill.
Thank you, Dr. Hook. Senator Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support this bill. I'm a co-author. But I did have a question because since I signed on to this, I'd learned that there is an issue, and this is new to me, that some people do have allergies to sunscreen. And I'm wondering, the doctor maybe can help with this one, how pervasive is that and what sort of risks might that pose for students at schools?
So parents
Dr.
would
Hook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Parents would be allowed to select which sunscreen they would like their students to apply. There are many components which have been included in sunscreens historically, which have been documented to cause some skin allergic reactions. Most of these common offenders have been removed from current sunscreen preparations. And the components that we currently most often recommend for kids, especially those with sensitive skin, include zinc and titanium, and those have not been shown to cause any allergic reactions.
So, Madam Chair.
Senator Kent.
As a quick follow-up. So, recognizing that parents would send in the proper sunscreen for their child, I guess I'm just wondering if in school, if there's a risk that someone who is allergic uses the sunscreen of somebody else, and, if there, again, the risks that might pose and the likelihood that could happen.
The overall risk of a Madam Chair, the overall risk of an allergic reaction to sunscreen is far less than the risk of sunburn and potential skin cancer. You'd be protected from using the sunscreen.
Any further comments, members? Dr. Hook, Senator Rosen, I'm surprised that we actually need this bill. It's a little bit shocking in a time when we realize that 18-year-olds should not go into suntan booths, and we are so concerned about our young children and their susceptibility to skin cancer. I'm surprised that this is needed, and I have one question regarding, and I can see how important it is that the school district would have a policy in place. You always need a policy in place for how things are handled because there could be allergic reactions or those type of things. And I'm wondering if there's someone here from the School Board Association that can tell me if, in fact, that there is a model policy regarding use of sunscreen in our schools. I do see somebody from the Minnesota School Board Association. Ms. Dietrich, I see you standing, rising to the occasion. Come on up.
And Madam Chair.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While she's coming up, also to Senator Kent's question, which is a very good question, perhaps the school policy would state that you will not be sharing your sunscreen with other students. It is your own personal, and you can't prevent anybody from sharing, but it's like a peanut allergy. Perhaps you don't know until you're exposed to it, but perhaps that could be in the school policy.
So, Senator Rosen, we'll hear from our school board. Thank you. Ms. Dietrich, welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Denise Dietrich on behalf of the Minnesota School Boards Association, and there is not a model policy that I am aware of on sunscreen usage, and so I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that in mind, I was tempted to say a school district must adopt, but if there's no model policies in place, I do believe that's important. And I do think, though, that there can be advantages to sharing sunscreen if your neighbor doesn't have any. And and they need that. But, there's age appropriateness and whether a first grader would know about what's in a sunscreen and if or not they are allergic. I think all those things are important. But we will lay Senate File 629. Senator Rosen, more comments.
Thank you. Just a closing comment, if you don't
Yes.
mind, Madam Chair. This came from a friend of mine, actually. And when I heard about it, it seemed like a common sense because, as I said, Minnesota has the highest rates of melanoma in the Midwest. So this is just a simple bill. School districts can adjust it how they want to, but at least we're giving a tool and they can take care of this unnecessary skin cancer.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. It is May. They may adopt. I think this makes an important statement regarding that policy, and we do want our students to be able to use sunscreen. It's wonderful that kids realize today they need to.
Right.
I grew up in a time when we did not.
Right.
So thank you very much. Senate File 629 will be laid over for possible inclusion.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, members.
Senator Anderson, welcome back to the testifying committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Anderson, Senate File 1745.
Yes, Madam Chair. I don't have an amendment. I'd like to move Senate File 1745 to be laid over for possible inclusion in the E12 omnibus bill.
Thank you, Senator Jensen. Senator Anderson, to your bill.
Thank you. Members, Senate File 1745 is a bill that appropriates $750,000 to Black Men Teach, an initiative that aims to increase the number of black male educators in elementary schools. The mission of Black Men Teach is to enlist all community stakeholders in a comprehensive, integrated initiative to increase the number of black male educators in Twin Cities elementary schools, thereby improving educational life outcomes for black male students and all students. Recruiting and retaining black male educators and teachers of all colors has been a challenge for our community, which is reflected by the limited number of male teachers of color in our classrooms. We know how important it is to increase the numbers of teachers of color, and Black Men Teach aims to do that with a new, comprehensive approach that integrates stakeholders in the teacher development pipeline to more effectively recruit, train, and mentor young black teachers. I'd like to introduce my testifiers to talk a little bit more about the program and the new approach. Dr. Rhoda Mary Peary-Reed, Superintendent of Hopkins Schools, Daryl Thompson with Boulder Options, and James Ewer.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Superintendent, welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Rhoda Mary Peary-Reed, Chair of Black Men Teach and also Superintendent of Hopkins Public Schools. I have two fellow board directors from Black Men Teach with me who will also provide testimony. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you who we are as a small organization as well as our strategic mission. And even though I have quite a demanding role as a district superintendent, I joined Black Men Teach because of its specific mission to increase the number of black male educators in the elementary grades. And I just have a quick story to frame my comments. So I have two children, a 7-year-old girl and a 5th grade boy. And the other night, I read a well-known children's book to my daughter. The book is called She Persisted by Chelsea Clinton. Maybe you've heard of it. I wanted my daughter Maddie to understand that as a girl, she can change the world. The book celebrates 13 women in history who shaped this country despite tremendous obstacles in their path, including wanting to achieve at high levels in male-dominated fields. And one of the 13 women is Sally Ride, who, as you know, was the first woman in space. She also created math and engineering programs for girls, and she said in the book, she's quoted, "Young girls need to see role models in whatever careers they may choose, just so they can picture themselves doing those jobs someday. You can't be what you can't see." And when I read those words out loud to my daughter, I thought about Black Men Teach. I thought about what Sally Ride wanted to achieve for girls and what we with Black Men Teach want to achieve for boys, specifically for Black boys, but more importantly for students of all races who need to see Black men teach. At Black Men Teach, our theory of change is if we build a strategic pipeline that places Black male teachers in classrooms, then children of all racial backgrounds will be positively impacted. Black men will be seen as important intellectual contributors in K-12 classrooms, and Black boys in particular will begin to see what they too can be. Black Men Teach was created because as a state we have failed to move the needle on increasing teachers of color. This failure of ours has a specific and detrimental impact on students and schools. In Minnesota, we serve roughly 460,000 elementary students, and our K-6 teachers are overwhelmingly women, mostly white women, very few male teachers, and even far fewer non-white male teachers. For example, in Hopkins, just 20% of our elementary teachers are male, and out of more than 140, there is only one Black male. Thus, Black Men Teach is about two things: increasing the number of Black male elementary educators and demonstrating how to increase the number of teachers of color by zeroing in on one particular cohort, and that's Black men. So our objective is laser focused. We aim to increase the number of Black male educators within and across 8 elementary schools. And we call these schools our demonstration sites, and Black Men Teach is a demonstration project. We've identified 2 schools in Hopkins, 2 schools in St. Paul, 2 strong charters in Minneapolis, and 2 schools in a 4th metro district. In 6 years, a minimum of 20% of all teachers within these 8 target schools will be licensed Black male educators. And when we achieve this goal, we will start to change the trajectory for our Black boys. Instead of being 3 times as likely to be excluded, suspended, or referred for special education, they will begin to see what else they can be. And we will also shape the perspectives of all children who will see that Black men choose to teach. So Black Men builds on the excellent work done by MANEP, teacher preparation programs at several Minnesota higher education institutions, and other local and national organizations that have prioritized cultivating teachers of color. Black Men Teach supports the coalition to increase teachers of color and American Indian teachers while engaging in a laser-focused pipeline building effort across 8 specific school contexts. What we have learned is that to be effective, a network of strategically formed partnerships must collectively address each challenge along the talent development pipeline. While a number of programs have addressed some of these challenges, they have tended to operate in isolation. In addition to our 3 partner districts and 2 partner charters, additional partners to Black Men Teach include the Doherty Family College, which is a 2-year program at St. Thomas, the St. Thomas School of Education, and Metro State University. The board of Black Men Teach meets monthly and is diligently working to secure private funding as well as your approval for a $750,000 appropriation. We are seeking $3.3 million over the next 6 years to pay for staffing, an executive director, stipended internships, paid student-teacher residencies, and fundraising support. From recruiting teacher candidates to personalizing the preparation process, to paid training and support, to hiring, classroom placement, and retention, Black Men Teach will be a thoughtful and strategic about every segment of this critical pipeline for the 24 to 30 Black male teachers we will cultivate. We are committed to one strategic plan for collective impact. And thank you for your time, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker. I wasn't sure who was going next.
I think I'm going next.
Mr. Thompson, welcome to the committee. Introduce
you,
yourself
Madam
for the
Chair.
record, please.
My name is Darrell Thompson. Thank you for taking the time out to hear from me today. In my opening statement, I was raised in Rochester, Minnesota, and both of my parents were college graduates. And until I went to college, I did not have a black male or female teacher. So when I was asked to be a part of this organization, I was moved. I felt like it was important, and it was something that was worth my time. I'm busy. I got a wife and 4 kids and all kinds of things going on, but this has become a big priority for me. I'm also a broadcaster in my part-time job, so I'm going to keep this brief. So I have like keys to the game, and I have my 3 keys that I think are extremely important here. And my first one is that research shows that students learn more when taught from someone from their own race. I thought that was extremely important when I read it. And the next one is the economic impact. The cost of a young man or young lady that loses their life to a life of crime is between $1.5 and $1.8 million. In Minnesota, it's $104,339 per year if you're going to lock somebody up. So it's a significant investment that we're making here. And my final key that I thought was important when I was preparing for this meeting today is that Minnesota has 63,436 teachers. 875 of those are African American. That's 1.4%. In the 7-county metro area, 44% of the students are students of color. It's an increase of about 2% in the last year. 7% of the teachers are teachers of color. So when we look at those stats and those facts and that information, that's why I think it's important for us to be here today. I understand that time is limited, and I don't envy your position sitting and listening to people talk all day about money, but this is something that's very, very important to me, and I'm very passionate about it. So thank you for taking time to listen to me.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Ewer, welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself for the record, please. And also, if we could have Josh Tellman approach as well. No, he's not coming. All right, Mr. Ewer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee. So my name is James Ewer, and I'm an educator. I've committed my waking hours to supporting students within my community, and I currently serve as the principal in residence at Prodeo Academy, which is a partner site and a partner organization for Black Men Teach. I think more importantly, I'm a father, right? And so I have an 18-month-old son at home, and everything I do is in support of ensuring that he has all the opportunities and experiences that he needs to be successful. And so what I hope to do is just paint really a short picture of my experience within being an educator and certain things that I would change within that. So for me, my experience started back as a paraprofessional, and that's as ground floor, as in the weeds, as organic as you can get. And it was during the process of moving from paraprofessional to school leader that I was a part of and had a ton of internal reflections in my mind. And I think it was during a lot of those internal reflections that I was able to distill out one primary thought. And the primary thought for me was the entire process was extremely, extremely damaging, right? I spent a lot of time thinking that I was isolated, I was alone, I was inadequate, I was any number of negative valences that you could associate to me during that process. And I think it was a part of that for 2 primary reasons. I think one, in every school that I've taught in, I was the only black male educator in the state of Minnesota. That's from the Wayzata Public School District, that's from Minneapolis Public Schools, that's from St. Paul. And I think without having that critical mass of individuals that, 1, looked like myself, that 2, were a part of a process in terms of trying to figure out how exactly do you become a great school leader and a great teacher. I mean, we are very communal individuals, and so for me, it was that lack of support that I had there. And so one thing that I would ask of you guys is how much more impactful, how much more meaningful, how much more powerful could my experience have been had I had that shared experience with a number of other individuals. The second piece that I want to touch on briefly is just the lack of ongoing support that I've had throughout my entire process. I think with the exception of friends and family, there really hasn't been an organization that has really stood behind me and really helped me figure out how to navigate the waters of, 1, becoming a teacher, and then 2, being really thoughtful and moving towards leadership specifically. And so a lot of that experience has been kind of figure it out on your own, chart your own path. And, you know, I would again ask, how much more of an advocate do you think I could have been if that would have actually been the case? Like, how much easier would it have been for me to pull somebody else up and say, hey, you know what, I actually think you'd be a great teacher, and here's some of the reasons why. And here are the exact sets of experiences and support that you would gain. In closing, the last piece that I'll say is I want to return back to my son, because that was exactly what I talked about at the beginning. So selfishly, I'm asking for something like this because of my son. He deserves it. He needs it. He needs to see more black males and more black male educators throughout his career. But I'm also uber aware of the added impact, the collective impact, the unfair advantage that we get from an organization like Black Men Teach. For me, it's paramount. It's not necessarily an idea that's saying the only students and the only individuals that would benefit are black males. I actually think in actuality, it's not a North Minneapolis thing. It's not a St. Paul thing. It's not a Wayzata thing. It's not even an urban thing. It's more so, how do we best support students, families, and communities within all of our schools thing. So I appreciate your time, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Tellman. Senator Anderson, final comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're always looking for solutions to issues we're facing, and what you see is a really, really talented board, really talented group that's come together to do a public-private partnership. You got Mr. Ewer as an example of a teacher that's coming and giving his testimony. So I just ask the committee to support Senate File 1745, and with that, I renew my motion to lay over Senate File 1745 for possible inclusion.
Thank you. It will be laid over. I believe Senator Uyghur had a comment he wanted to make.
Thank you,
Senator
Madam
Uyghur.
Chair. Thank you, Senator Anderson, and all the testifiers were great. And Mr. Thompson, it's just a pleasure to see you. I so much wish you would have become a Minnesota Viking. But for those of you don't know, the star player, not only John Marshall, but the Minnesota Gophers, first round draft pick, and giving back now in the community.
Packers.
That's great.
All right. Senate File 1745 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you so much. And now we missed Senator Jensen. Probably he was presenting somewhere else. Senator Jensen, we have 10 minutes, but we think that will give you time to present Senate File 1993. Senator Housley, could you move Senator Jensen's bill, please? Senate File 1993 is moved for laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Senator Jensen, to your bill. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm presenting Senate File 1993 related to education finance, and it would authorize a lease levy for a transportation hub in eastern Carver County schools, which is basically Chaska, one of the largest school districts in the state and one of the fastest growing school districts in one of the fastest growing counties. Without further ado, I will turn it over to my testifier, if it would be pleased, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Jensen. Ms. Carring, welcome to the committee. Identify yourself for the record, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. My name is Dee Dee Carring. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations for Eastern Carver County Schools. Our school district is asking for increased flexibility regarding the building lease levy, which would allow our school board to utilize levy authority for the lease purchase of a new transportation facility in another area in our district. Similar legislation was granted to Rosemont Apple Valley Egan in 2014. Having a new transportation garage facility with appropriate storage and maintenance space would provide the district with the opportunity to discontinue our contracted transportation service. Operating routes ourselves would save the district approximately $675,000 a year, a savings that could be used for classroom-related programs instead of transportation. In addition, it is estimated that the decrease in transportation costs would result in a savings to the state budget by approximately $180,000 a year due to a reduction in special education aid that would be paid typically to our school district. The initial estimates of the lease levy increase was $600,000, but upon further calculation, it is about half of that amount. As Senator Jensen said, with more than 10,000 students, we are one of the largest school districts in the state of Minnesota and projected to grow by 1,400 students in the next 5 years. The district's bus garage is located on a prime site in downtown Chaska. Redevelopment of this site would provide an opportunity for 3 government agencies, the city, the county, and the school district, to better serve its citizens and students. Carver County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state. The bus garage site is the preferred site for relocation of Carver County's Health and Human Services Center. In addition, Chaska is looking for a new location for its library, which is undersized for the community's need. Their location of choice is the Carver County License Center, and the License Center would be able to move to the bus garage location as well. In addition, the bus garage site provides potential for additional much-needed affordable housing in the city of Chaska. By increasing flexibility for building lease levy, the 3 government agencies would be able to move more quickly to finalize the developments as previously outlined. You have documents in your packet of all of the different diagrams. Again, Eastern Carver County Schools is asking for increased flexibility related to the building lease levy for the lease purchase of a new transportation facility. Carver County and the City of Chaska support Eastern Carver County School requests that legislature assist in making this multifaceted, cost-effective plan better serve the students and its citizens, and you'll find a letter from each of the county and the city included in your packet. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Keyring. Just without this bill, without this piece of legislation, how would a school district normally handle something like this? Would
Sure.
it go to the voters? What's the normal process? Senator Ms. Keyring.
We would have 2 options, Madam Chair. One would be to take the funds out of the general fund, paying our lease payments out of the general fund, or going to the voters for a bond referenda. That's correct.
Thank you. And then, Ms. Keyring, why are you proposing legislation instead of doing, or why would you like to see legislation
Sure.
as opposed to those 2 other more normal avenues?
Yes, Madam Chair and committee, we currently are facing over $2.5 million in reductions as it is, and to add a lease payment to our general fund would be cost prohibitive. It's been part of the reason why we've not been able to move forward with a bus garage. Additionally, the reason we're asking for flexibility is that the county and the city both have urgent needs to move forward on their projects. In the county, the Health and Human Services area is out of space, and having us have that flexibility and not waiting for a bond referenda would provide that immediate flexibility that the county is in need of as well.
How much would the school district be paid should Senate File 1993 pass?
For the property?
Yes.
Madam
Keyring.
Chair, we did have an appraisal done by both the county and the city, a joint appraisal, and it was about $3.5 million that it's valued at.
Thank you very much. Members, any further comments? Thank you. Closing comments, Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Without your guidance, we wouldn't be here before you. This is a win-win. This is the potential for a school district to work with the county, to work with the city. This is a potential for a library to be present, Health and Human Services Division Center to be present. I think it fills so many needs. It's just one of those perfect storm situations. So I would encourage the Education Committee to look favorably on this proposal. The school district would still be well underneath its cap for its lease levy limit of $212 per student. And again, thank you, Madam Chair, for being so supportive.
Thank you, Senator Jensen. Senate File 1993 will be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Members, we will be recessing here. Before we do, just a couple housekeeping details. Just a timeline for you as we look towards our final deadlines and then our omnibus bill. March 27th, we will cease hearing regular bills. April 8th, we plan to post a delete all omnibus amendment to the website and provide a walkthrough. I will provide a walkthrough to each caucus, both Republicans and Democrats. Then on April 9th, we'll have testimony. And on April 10th, we plan to mark up and vote the bill out to tax committee. So just for your calendars for that. We will recess to the call of the chair. Both caucuses do have caucus meetings tonight. I anticipate that we will be back at 6, but I cannot guarantee the time. So we are recessed until the call of the chair. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Senator Uyghur. Materials may be left here. There are 4 bills left that we will hear when we reconvene. Senate File 1899, Senator Housley, Senate File 2180, Senator Marty, Senate File 1427, Senator Anderson, and 2327, Senator Rest. Thank you. We are recessed.